the law, in terms of Section 52 of the MFMA, prescribe, okay, by submission of the report in a prescribed format to council on the implementation of the budget, financial state of affairs of the municipality. If you remember yesterday, we spoke about the report that is in a prescribed format, that should then be submitted to council, that is monitoring the implementation of the budget during the course of the financial. And I had recommended yesterday, or when we spoke yesterday, we said part of the report that we're expected to get is your C schedules, which are prescribed by the regulations. Now the report that I'm seeing here, this one, it's a narration document. In other words, the MBRR prescribes that there must be a narration report, that is a word where they explain, but also there must be Schedule C, those tables. I don't see these tables here. You will bear with me because it's a bit of long report. I hope you have it, maybe you might have seen it, unless if the tables are down there, I did not see them. But what I see here, it's a report that is a Word document report, that is a narration report, which, among other things, the accounting officer is expected to sign a quality certificate to qualify that information contained in this report, as it's submitted to the mayor, is the correct report. If you look at 3.1, it says C schedules are attached, or C schedules are attached, I suppose, as annexures. And let's hope that these C schedules that I spoke about are down there attached, because that's where perhaps we need to look at when we analyze Section 52 report. Okay. You will bear with me because I don't know where they are attached, unless if there are separate attachments, chairperson of this report. But I suppose they could be maybe down there. If you will bear with me that I quickly check. If I quickly check.
There's the annexures to the report.
These are not the schedules.
I don't think there's
any. Here are the schedules.
Okay.
These are the schedules that I spoke about.
So they are attached.
Yes, these are the schedules. So when we speak of the schedules, these are the ones that are prescribed by NBRR, by the regulations. Now, we will be going forth and back, primarily because you go to let's look at property rates. Unless perhaps we can use two computers. Because I would want to look at, let's look at property rates and look at what they said. If you look at the first one, perhaps the committee will need to decide either to aggregate meaning if you look at operating revenue, like your financial performance, your property rate, service charge, investment revenue, transfer and subsidies and own revenue, that is your operating revenue, that when you analyze them as a pack, or alternatively you can then single them out. If you look at what management has captured, let's start here. If you look at what management has captured on operating revenue, for instance, they are saying the overall performance on revenue component is 13% below target. The performance is mainly due to negative performance on service charge. But when you look at operating revenue, it has quite a number of line items. Your property rates, your service charge, electricity and water, investment and other income. Now for you, if you look at this and you don't consider the schedules, you would not necessarily know where you need to focus in terms of the differences between year-to-date budget and year-to-date variance. So the point I'm raising, that is why it is always important to have these schedules. This is an aggregate. The 13% is on overall operating revenue. This is the overall operating revenue. I intend not to be fast so that at least we're able to follow. This is the operating revenue. Property rates, service charge, investment revenue, transfer and subsidies, and other own revenue. Now, our focus would be, if you look at the budget, okay, if you look at the budget, it's year-to-date budget. We're looking at section 71 for December. If you look at the budget on property rates, for instance, the municipality has budgeted 185 million. That is the budget. The performance year-to-date actual, this is the performance, how the municipality performed. It's 189. So it's more. So in other words, there's overperformance.
Yeah.
Okay, can you see that?
Yeah.
So it means the municipality has performed over and above what it was budgeted for. And the variance there, it's for, I suppose it's 4 million. Yeah, it's now in terms of percentage terms, it's 2% above the budgeted amount. But when you look at the narration, it's overall. If you look at how they narrated, it's an overall on operating revenue, all of it, the entirety, which amounts to 13%. This is the 13% that they spoke about. If you look at it, this one is the one in terms of those narrations there. This is the 13% that they gave us for overall performance on operating revenue. Now, if you would want to check with administration, you would then say, well, you are alleging that we have overperformed in terms of property rates. What are the causes? Why have we overperformed? What happened? Did we have new properties that were not there in the valuation roll before, or what happened? So it is for administration to inform council if there's a variance in terms of the difference between the budget and the actual. So you don't need to scratch your head, but when you look at the overall report, they aggregated. I want to talk to this one and we stop a bit and interrogate and see if we are together, because the principle is going to be the same even when we do the other ones. This is where we are. Now the principle is going to be the same. Now, if the risk of aggregating is that you don't get to be told of other line items in terms of their performance, because there they gave you an aggregate of the entire operating revenue. But if you would want to ask questions, then among other questions on, for instance, property rate line items, you are then able to say we've budgeted X amount of money, we achieved X amount of money, this is the variance, and what led to this variance. So administration, as in when we pose questions to them, must then be able to tell why have we achieved, or why was overperformance on property rate. Although overperformance is welcome, it's unlike underperformance. So it means probabilities are that there may be lots of money coming into municipal bank account because it is an overperformance, it's not an underperformance. So, but then if there's a variance, at least management can highlight and say, from where we're seated, the reason why we're having 2% extra is because we had new development elsewhere in the municipal jurisdiction, and that is why perhaps in terms of the performance, we performed more than we expected. So let's go to the second example, or perhaps we would want to entertain this one first, perhaps before we move to the second ones. If honorable councillors would want to talk to this, so that when we move to the second one, we are fine. We're finding each other. But if it's understandable and we're moving we're reading from the same hymn book, then we should be fine. Then we move to the second line item, which would be after property rate. I think it's service charges. Let's go to service charges. Or you want to talk to property rates? Okay. Then let me talk to. I may not talk to all of them. All of the.
I think the general understanding that you are highlighting, Mr. Rapela, is that we need to compare the budget with the variance, and our question to management should be based on that.
Okay. Yeah, let's look at this one, which has a very huge variance. Let's look at proper service charges. These service charges would include both water and I suppose both water, electricity, and electricity as well. If you look at the budget, which is what we're comparing, we're not comparing the original budget against what was achieved, which is after 6 months. We're comparing what was targeted, which is year-to-date budget as at December 2021 against the year-to-date actual December 2021. Now, the budget, if you look at service charge, is 786. It's 786 million if you look at it, and the actual what was achieved in terms of billing. Remember, when we talk service charge at this level, it's billing. When we talk actual cash, it's what is sitting in your cash flow. Now it's billing. We're issuing invoices to community to say electricity or water. The accounts, these are the accounts. That's when you bill. That is what is captured under C1. But the real cash, the actual cash that we receive, it's sitting in your cash flow statement. Now let's look at this one. The year-to-date budget is 786, and the year-to-date actual it's 596. Now there's a difference. There's a variance of 24%. The municipality is likely to lose 190 million if you look at it. This is the difference in rent terms, but in percentage terms it would amount to 24% on service charge. Now it is not for you as members of MPAC to crack your heads and want to say, I mean, what is this? It is for management to tell you what is this difference all about, the 24%. So when we formulate the questions, we would then be saying what led to this variance. They may be telling you of the distribution losses in terms of electricity, that there are illegal connections. There may be various reasons that management may tell, but we do not want to preempt to say what would management say. It is for them to put it in writing and say this is the cause of these losses. And part of the questions that you may also ask is that what is it that you're doing if it's distribution losses or illegal connections, for instance? What is it that management is doing to ensure that we kept distribution losses, the strategies? And you may as well pose a question and say, we would want to get if there's a revenue enhancement strategy or there's a program that the management is implementing to keep distribution losses. If the reason is distribution, I'm just saying distribution losses as an example, or illegal connection as an example. But it is for management to put measures in place to ensure that they cap the distribution losses or illegal connection or whatever the case may be. But that would be determined by the responses from management. So then you have investment revenue, which also has a very huge difference, the huge variance, because if you look at the budget was 40.1, the target year-to-date target was 7 million, and the year-to-date actual is 4.1, which has a very huge variance. Let's go back and see what management has, but they did not say anything even before because they aggregated. I had thought that perhaps when we go back to the narrations up there, we would see how they narrated. What story did they tell council to say, why didn't we perform on investment revenue? Why didn't we perform on service charges? So narrations were not made. So the recommendations going forward, as when you write questions to management, is that in their report they must narrate, they must give you information in terms of why there was underperformance on investment revenue, on transfers and subsidies. And I'm expecting this one to be more accurate, because here it's grants, your subsidies, your transfers and subsidies. It's your grants from operational grants from national. You take them straight from DORA. It's not collection of revenue that you don't know whether or not you'll be able to collect. But here it's pure grants that are gazetted in your division of revenue, in your DORA. So my understanding was that unless if there was a rejection of rollover, maybe municipality has applied for rollover, they did not spend in the previous year, and national government offset that on conditional grants. I don't know. What for you to know, it's when you write to management, for management to tell you why is your transfers and subsidies not in line with your division of revenue, because it is gazetted. It's 5 million, it's 5 million, then you take it as is and put it here. So if there's a difference, management is the one who must be able to tell why there's this difference. And then I think I spoke at length around property, around operation revenue. So if there's a question, perhaps we can pause a bit here and honorable councillors clarify one or two things on operating revenue before perhaps we go to expenditure. But if the principle is understood, even in terms of expenditure, it's the same thing. On employee cost, you look at your budget versus your actual. Then the difference management must tell. You just form draft question, management, tell us why. Why there's a difference? What are the causes? What are you going to do going forward to rectify whatever mistakes that may be there? It's the same principle. But if you want me to go down one by one, I can do that. I have the entire time. I'm not in hurry for anything. But that is the principle, which is what we spoke about yesterday. But I've highlighted this one, and I'm saying I'm handing it over to Chairperson to direct us to what we do from here and so on.
Thank you very much, Mr. Apela. Let me first ask if there are any questions or inputs. Councillor Mofokeng.
Thank you, Chairperson. Yeah, Chairperson, it is indeed true. When you look into that variances, you start from that 2%, you go to 24, you go to 41, very huge. You go to 31, you go to 31 again, and then up until right down. Now we haven't even finished with that. Let's go again to the total revenue, capital transfer and the contribution. Check how huge, variations are we having there. That's really true. It's like, we are running the tuck shop here. There's a tuck shop in Govan Mbeki. This is, entails to you that our managers are just running the tuck shop, not running the institute.
No, I think your input is received, Councillor Mofokeng.
Yes.
I think the general application that we can apply to our question, since we are compiling our questions to management now today, I think the general methodology that we can follow with this report and with the others as well is just to zoom into the variations. And
yes.
I think one thing that's actually just being highlighted here is that there's a lack of narration from management, or at least in this report, to indicate why there are these variations. So I think that will most definitely be our first question. And then also in terms of the aggregation that Mr. Apela was speaking of, I think we can ask for clarity on why it is that they follow that method instead of detailing a bit more, if that seems to make sense, Mr. Apela, instead of detailing a bit more, to give us more information on why the report is indicating overperformance or underperformance. And I think we can just apply that to the majority of the report, really. I think going through every section, we've seen this report in the council as well. We know that there are these huge variations in every section of this report. So I think we can just make that a general, or at least our first general question. Are there any other inputs? No, all right.
I just wanted to check just one thing, the capital expenditure on project. That would be the last thing, because we agreed that the principle will be the same. I just wanted to check the schedule on capital expenditure, to check how the municipality is faring in terms of that. look at capital expenditure, this would be your conditional grants. There's a variance of 72% if you look at this, if this report is correct, because 132 was budgeted and only 37.4 was actually realized or spent, because this could be expended. And if this is true, it means there's a disaster in terms of capital spending, because this would be your capital grants, it would be your MIC, your municipal infrastructure grant, or any other conditional grant that is there. And this is money assigned for projects. And if you look at the variance there, only 37 million was spent out of 132 million that was spent. So the spending there, it's just way below. It's just unacceptable if you look at it. And it's not me. Is this report? This is the variance that is being captured here. I'm not standing here to badmouth management. It's what management has presented in terms of this report, in terms of the variance, and it is for management to tell whether or not indeed this was spending. But the other thing is this budget of internally generated of 141 million. I just don't know, because it was captured in the look at it this way. Municipality budgeted 141 million for internally generated funds, and I don't know where they're going to get this money. This 141, and to prove that, look, the budget was 70 million, right? As at December, only 2.7 to show that this was never realistic even in the first place.
Yeah.
Because 70.9 million, but they alleged to have generated 2.7 million. If you look at it, this is the report, and the variance it's 96%.
Oh.
So you can rightfully tell that this amount should not have been there even in the first place, because the collection was not there. Why did they budget? And the problem with this kind of arrangement is when you go to communities as councillors and say, we're going to do X and Y in your communities, we have money. This is the money that you're talking about. And ordinarily that money is not there. You promised 7 ones that we're going to do 7 projects in different ones from internally generated revenue. This is what you said you would have. But when you look at it, it's not there. That money is not there. It's not even cash backed. It's not even in the bank. That is why you see this 2.7 here. So which shows that this was never realistic even in the first place. That is why our budget is unfunded budget. So yeah, that is the thing. I think I would go to so while we're here, it is for administration to account. Firstly, on spending on conditional grant, that when we formulate our questions, we formulate them in such a way that they're able to tell an account to MPAC as to why are we not moving in terms of conditional grants. It's free money if I were to put this, not free, but I'm just saying it was given to us or to the municipality to spend and have projects, roads, whatever the case may be in terms of the services. But the institution is not moving. And the risk of not spending conditional grants is that National Treasury wants its money back if you don't spend. It's sitting in your bank, you're not using it, they're giving you millions. If for instance, they are giving you 264 million for projects and you don't spend, you spend only 37, the difference must go back to the national fiscus and give it to Steve Chweta or any other municipality that is spending, because they are serious about spending. So they are giving it to people who are serious about spending for them to service their communities. Here we don't want to service our communities. But I'm not saying so. I'm saying it is for you as honorable councillors to write to administration, for administration to tell you, why are we not spending? We've been given money here. And National Treasury says, I want my money back if you're not spending. So they will tell you, formulate your questions to an extent that they're able to tell you. But over and above that, do they have a strategy to expedite spending on conditional grants? It's one of the things that you could also establish from administration as to whether or not there's an acceleration plan of some sort or a strategy to move spending, because they may then say, we are not spending because of 1, 2, 3, or we did not spend because of 1, 2, 3, and moving forward. And we're left with this was December report if you look at it. So today we're sitting, it's end of February almost. I don't know whether the spending could move from 72 to 80. I don't know. It is for them to tell. When you formulate your question, also get us whether there's an acceleration strategy to spend this money, because if you don't spend, and the other implication we got to understand is that if you don't spend, they will take it from your equitable share next year. Or if you have it in your bank account, you are not using it for operational purposes, well, perhaps you may pay it back and say, no, Treasury, here is your money back, here is your 280 million back into national fiscal. But if you don't and you keep it in your bank account, they offset it against your transfers. Your next transfer is probably in the next financial year. But I wanted to see what they said in terms of narration on capital expenditure. Let's see what administration has said before we move to creditors. Okay, here we are. They're saying total expenditure amounts to, okay, total capital expenditure to date, it's 43.0. Of this amount, 14 relates to MIG, 1.3 to water service infrastructure, 10.5 to regional. Here they're just telling us what this is about.
Yes.
MIG was allocated 10, the other one was allocated. They're not telling us about spending, because our interest there is that on MIG we did not spend, or we spent. What were the reasons why we could not spend on MIG? I'm just giving an example with MIG. So those are so here is a statement that is more or less the same as what is captured in your Schedule C, because Schedule C will tell you how much you received from it. So I don't know, but the way in which I read it, it's just for them to tell us how much was allocated for each grant, as it were. So there's no explanation to explain that variance of 70. Is it 72%?
Yeah, it's huge.
It should be 72% if I remember well.
72.
Yes, there's 72. So the narrations there do not tell us what were the reasons for us not spending. It's just telling us how much was allocated to a particular a conditional grant. I think I will talk to debtors and creditors from there, and then for me, that would be the end of this. But the principle is the same. Whether you analyze section 71 or 52, the principle is the same. Perhaps we will open 71 just for this schedule and see, but the principle is the same, because you are going to focus on your variances, and management must explain why there's underperformance or overperformance. The questions that we write is purely more or less the same, to try and establish the reasons why and what are they going to do going forward to try and rectify whatever that was not done correctly. Just wanted to check what they said on creditors and debtors. Cash flow, just tell us what is in the bank and what is in the cash book. It's not much there. Okay. Debtors book. Our debtors book had a total of 2.7 billion. This is billion. At the end of December 2021. And the debtors payment rate for the quarter is 61%. And on creditors, I will deal with them, all of them at the same time. They're saying total creditors balance for the quarter ending December, or rather 31st December 2021, amounted to 3.1 billion. So we are being owed 2.7 billion. We are owing our creditors 3.1 billion. The major creditors there being ESCOM and Rand Water. So this is just a statement to tell you. Let me go to the schedules. But I would have loved administration to detail, particularly on debtors, because there we don't know the categories of debtors there, whether it's household, whether it's business, whether it's farmers and whatnot, but also in your questioning, you go to establish what is it that we're doing, because you might find, let's go and check how much business. Let's start with business for argument's sake, because we don't expect business to owe us, because you may be sympathetic with households, because it may be that COVID has affected people have lost their jobs. It may be one of those reasons. But businesses, let's go and check the schedule for business and see if this sheet is supporting. Let's go and check business.
I thought I was going to.
I wanted to check the categories. All right. I hope you can see. Look at the first one. It's organs of state. Organs of state 231. So these are whether it would be your clinics, your schools, or any other properties that are belonging to government institution within municipal jurisdiction. Then they are owing 231. If you look at the commercial, that would be business. Business is owing 164 million. The household is the one that is at the top, which is 2.0. Now the question which you would want to establish from us administration is that what are we doing to collect this money, like your 231, particularly your 231 and your 164. Not that your 2 billion must not be collected, and that is not what I'm saying. I'm saying these are the amounts that are that ordinarily should be in the municipal bank accounts, ordinarily, but they are not. And even here, you may also find that okay, the issue more is for MPAC to establish from that administration in terms of the strategies. The amounts are not looking good. What is it that management is doing to try and collect this money? There are projects that should be funded, and they're not funded because there are businesses that are not even paying for municipal services. I've seen in Pretoria I think 3 weeks ago, yeah, well, there was a serious engagement with business to try and collect this money. I just do not know what is the strategy for administration here at Govan Mbeki to try and collect monies that are due. And when you look at it in terms of creditors, they may then say we're not collecting enough. That is why your creditors continues to grow, particularly your Eskom and rent water. But this money here that is sitting here with 2.4 million also, that should be assisted to offset this amount of money that we owe our creditors. So it is for MPAC to ask those questions to administration, for administration to tell the strategies that are being employed by these institutions to collect this money. The one which must even top the list is business. There you can't even be apologetic. This money should be in municipal bank account, because if they don't pay you cut the services. It's business. At least with business, you don't expect community to come and gather here and give you problems. So yeah, so it's for MPAC to write those probing questions unapologetically. So to try and find why a situation is like this, but over and above that, what is it that is being done by the administration to try and collect these monies that are being owed? Because the collection rate, surely it's very low. I thought, yeah, maybe I should stop there.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rapela. I think that concludes the Section 52 report. Apart from the deviations.
You also did deviations?
Yes, I also have that section. I think we can discuss that just now. Maybe let me just open the floor for questions first. You are welcome, Councillor van Huisteen. Please ensure to sign the attendance register. Any questions or any inputs? Yes, Mr. Mofokeng.
Yeah, Honorable Chair, I've got a problem because even the manner in which they've identified the businesses, some of the business areas are unidentifiable. Let me say, for example, if we go to Mshinwam, you'll say those people, how much are they really owing? I'm just making the example. When you go to Imoje, buildings, how much are they owing? And if I can say, Honorable Chairperson, there are certain commercial businesses that are not doing anything to this municipality. And we are aware that there are also those connected areas, connected, people that are closer to those, politicians that are not even doing anything in this area. It's just one example that I can make. Go to Mshinwame and see how much are they contributing to this municipality. They are within our areas here, because it's a certain institute that is connected to certain politicians, and therefore nothing is happening. In the previous report last year, we found that the Kaya Mall in Mbalenhle was contributing 0 in terms of the rates. It's a business, it's a mall. Huh? And the executive mayor did not even feel ashamed to say they are temporarily agreement, but the people are functioning fully. That business is fully in operation. They are not contributing anything here. And it's more of them. It's more of them that you would found that they are politically connected. And for that, to them, it's like we're just, there are certain people that are getting the kickbacks for those people to survive or to sustain themselves. I went to some of the other DB boxes underneath some of the businesses over here. We found that there's one individual person said to be always getting kickbacks before he can just simply, lift to put an electricity on if there's non-payment. Because when we visited the area during the Operation Rutula, I found that we are not having, our lock system is not properly. We call it a lock system, but any individual person can go there and open it again. You can try to close it, but any individual can simply go to that DB box. It's accessible to them. So we cannot have a system that is just being like that. We definitely cannot. So businesses have already seen our loophole to say, no, these people, it's very easy. You just speak to one individual person, and therefore they are going to operate as normal. Yeah. It's one of the assessment that, during those operations, you could found that, the system is not really, good at all. I've worked in a private company. I'm telling you, if I said you isolate a certain area, no one has gotten accessible to that place. In our area of the jurisdiction, as an institute, every Tom, Dick, and Harry can temper, can do whatever that they like in the business, areas. That is my biggest concern.
Thank you, Councillor Mofokeng.
And commercials like, excuse me, Chairperson, like in some of the commercials, like where there are trucks, the commercials around all Govan Mbeki, they are not contributing to this municipality. Not at all. I was vocal and I said, let's have the financial indaba where we can look upon to say, let's target area per area in order to ascertain, to ensure that, we are going to have something all in common. It just fall into the veins, into deaf ears.
Let me give Councillor Nel Buitendag a chance.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Regarding what Councillor Mofokeng is also saying, is based on the contractors that Government Mbeki used to install new meters, and those contractors broke the locks. We did complain about it. However, nothing was actually done to help actually the contractors accountable for the damage of municipal property, for replacing this new smart meters and stuff. So the administration department actually must help these people accountable to come and fix all these locks and doors. It's based on their negligence that we sit in the situation that we are sitting today regarding this. And that's why there's a lot of cable theft, stealing of prepaid electricity, all those things. So people are bypassing the meters. And there's a few cases here in Govan Mbeki.
I also find a problem with the locks to the electricity boxes, councillors. We've seen that the person has actually been injured in Bethel quite recently because of exposed cables. It's not only a hazard for our infrastructure, but it's also for our lives. So I think that can be a question that we can also ask the management in light of our damaged infrastructure and contractors that should be held accountable, even though it's not relevant to this report. Councillor Van Heijden, I'll give you a chance just now. And then in terms of those allegations, Councillor Mofokeng, I think it would be appropriate to let the management respond to that while we have that discussion with them. But I'd appreciate if we can also come up with questions in our sitting together now, that we can be able to deliver them for their response. Councillor Van Heijden, are you also followed by Councillor Mthembu? Thank you.
First of all, I'm sorry, thank you for allowing me to be late. We don't have microphones.
No, Councillor, I've just been shouting. No, I've seen the official from IT passing by. He seemed to be busy with something else. I tried to switch on the microphones myself here, but I'm not sure if you are aware of this locked box here in the front. I don't have access to it, so unfortunately we can't switch them on. So just elevate your voice, or otherwise you can join us here in the front. Let me just quickly, for your own benefit, we are on the Section 52 report for Q2. Something else that I wanted to request, colleagues, if it's possible for us to remove the Section 71 reports from our agenda, since yesterday in our terms of reference we've approved that we will be discussing quarterly reports and the mid-year report. So I think discussing the 71 reports are going to be redundant, especially looking at the kind of advice that Mr. Rapella is giving us. We will just be applying the same method to a number of the reports. Yes.
Right. The point that I actually wanted to make is the locks that everybody's complaining about is very specialized locks that was placed on certain of these boxes, and they were placed at a cost of around 6,000 Rand each. And while they were installed, immediately the keys started getting lost and those locks were broken. There's a huge amount of these locks purchased for 6,000 Rand each. So I think that's something we can look at if we are going to look at the safety of those boxes as well, because we received photos at one stage. It's quite an old issue, but we received photos at one stage of what the locks look like. But it's no use if we have those locks for that amount of money and they get broken by our own officials very quickly. Thank you.
Thank you. In addition to that, I've also seen in some cases where those specialized locks have been installed, and when they couldn't open it, they just broke off the doors. So making the lock really just fruitless and wasteful expense. Councillor Mtembu?
Thank you, Chairperson. Thank you. I just wanted to say thank you to Mr. Apale. You've really broken the ice on us as new councillors coming in to these chambers. At first, when I was looking on the budget thing, it was just a lot of numbers that were not making sense. But now, at this stage, I can clearly tell you that I know what to look for on the budget. Thank you, Mr. Apale, for the awareness that you've created.
Thank you very much, Councillor Mtembu. I fully agree with you. I think Mr. Rapela has really opened up our eyes and given us a magnifying glass for these reports. All right, getting back to our questions to management colleagues, I think what's been highlighted so far, following our earlier discussion, from capital expenditure, we are concerned on the expenditure on grants. Conditional grants. So we ask questions to that effect, such as what the reasons are for poor spending on the various grants. So I think to that effect we should actually request an explanation on each of the different grants so that we can get a detailed response. Then in terms of the budget, there's a negative 96% variance. So that's because of the over expected amount of internally generated funds, which is something that we've also tried to highlight in the council in the past. There's quite a undesirable tendency to expect more funds than what we are having. So I think we should ask what the strategy is to expedite spending in terms of conditional grants, and then just highlight the risk of unspent conditional grants as a reason for us asking those questions. In terms of debtors and creditors, we'd like to have more detail on the debtors, such as the different categories. Organs of state is one of the concerns that personally I'm having. I understand that we can also ask businesses without fear or favor for their payment of services, but it should, the same thinking should apply to organs of state, in my opinion. I don't know if you've seen, speaking about Tshwane Metro, I don't know if you've seen a interesting project they've undertaken to generate revenue from organs of state. Actually is to name and shame them on social media platforms, and in this way they've actually generated a lot of revenue, and apart from that they've also been able to make arrangements with organs of state that can't pay. So I think when we apply the credit and debt control policy, the same thing should apply for organs of state as well. I mean, I think it's just good cooperative governance. Then our question to that effect would be, what is the municipality doing to collect this money? Are you having a question? Yes, Councillor Mbeki.
I've got a question to say, more especially when they are designing their contract with regard to those that are in the debts, especially the businesses, Mr. Rapela, whether whatever they are designing to ensure that, I mean, these business people are being held accountable to service their, I mean, all their service level agreement in terms of the supply of electricity. I'm worried if indeed what we are seeing there to the variance is is as much as they're doing good to those contracts that are going to be signed to say it, from now on this is because there can be a lot of a loophole as well, a lot of a loophole, looking into what really is happening here. Definitely, it's one of the things that I'm saying, Chairperson, we must try to tighten all our belts. Definitely, and I'm worried about whether are we having the check collectors in this municipality, or we're having people that are saying indeed this is what our key performance indicators are looking into us to fulfill. It looks like we have got too much lot of the check collectors in this institute. I've got a fear.
I think, Councillor Mofokeng, what we can request from management is a report on payment arrangements with businesses and organs of state. I think that might assist us to see that whether are they following up on these payments, and who are keeping to these arrangements or not keeping to them. And then, like Mr. Appela was indicating, what the municipality is doing to collect service charges from businesses and organs of state. And then perhaps a recommendation in future that we should consider was such an engagement with businesses, and at least based on the payment arrangement reports, we'd make a recommendation from there. Something in terms of debtors and creditors that I'm also concerned of is the collection for service charges from councillors. I think public office bearers should be held accountable for their municipal accounts. I know this is something that's extensively been discussed in MPAC, and personally I've seen some service accounts to councillors, exceeding the amount of 300,000. So which is totally unacceptable. I'm not aware whether this councillor is having a payment arrangement or not, and I think we should be requesting a report to that effect as well in terms of debtors and creditors, if you agree, Mr. Appela. I think that concludes this report. Maybe I should ask the committee, do you want to go into the Q1 report in the same detail, or will we just apply the same method of questioning to that report? That report has been brought to the committee since that quarter actually took place during election campaigning time and elections taking place, and then the establishment of the council at the end of November. So the first quarter report at the end of September wasn't considered by the former MPAC, because that kind of gap in our council work made it impossible for them to consider it. So I think we can just apply the same methods to our questioning. If you agree, I can see Councillor Nel Buitendag is moving and Councillor Matebula is seconding that. So that's for the section 52 reports.
The same questions that we're asking in
Yeah,
section
the same,
52.
Yeah.
Say again?
No, you ask what questions?
Okay. Yeah, so the same questioning. If you have anything in addition to that, colleagues, please feel free to still send them in writing, either on the WhatsApp group or even via email, or whatever method you find appropriate. Just make sure that they reach me, let's say, before Thursday, so that we can be able to give management at least 7 days to respond, after which we'll be meeting again to consider those responses. Any additions to that, Mr. Appela?
No, I agree that the principle is the same. For section 71 as at September and for December as well, and even for December it will be more or less the same as 52 if you come to think of it, because the year to date will be as at December and 52 is as, so the rationale there is it's more or less the same. So even your section 71 is to look at those variances and pose questions to management, for management to give you reasons for incurring those or for over and under performance, and then to give you strategies and plans to move out of the particular situation if it is a bad situation. And other than that, I don't have further comments. But this is a very important committee, Chairperson, for you to hold the executive and management accountable. So if you lose the ball, you have yourselves to blame in the end, because you are the one who must make others to run, as it were. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rapela. This is exactly my reason for the inclusion of councillors' service accounts, because we should be held accountable as public office bearers as well. Colleagues, with your indulgence, alright, I'm going to close the quarterly reports in that case. The Section 71, we've decided not to deal with those as per the agenda. Section 72 is the mid-year budget and performance assessment report, which in effect should be the quarter 1 plus quarter 2 reports. So unless you think otherwise, Mr. Rapela, I think the same method applies. But if at all possible, colleagues, since we now zoomed into the quarter 2 reports, can we please have a look at the deviations, purchases above 100,000, unauthorized, frivolous and wasteful expenditure? These are important sections in our report that we need to specifically look into as the Municipal Public Accounts Committee. I was having a guideline here. Alright, so maybe let me just take us through the report, unless you would prefer, Mr. Rapela. Okay, the first section is giving us the deviations. There were no deviations for the quarter ended December 2021. Just to clarify, maybe I compared this with the quarter 1 report, and the reasons in general given for deviations, and this I would suggest to be our first question in terms of deviations as well, specifically relates to narration as well. The same with the report that, the largest section of the report that we've mentioned earlier. It's only referring to the regulations of the MFMA, indicating that deviations are, long story short, because of an emergency. So I think we should request an explanation of what those emergencies were, why was it necessary to deviate supply chain management policy because of it. Are there any additions for deviations? Should we look at the quarter 1 report at the same time?
Can you just open it?
This is quarter 1. What I was mentioning is this section here is giving us the reason. If you read the regulation, it boils down to an emergency. So if you look at what was purchased there, repairs of bulk pipeline in Imbalenhle, installation of bulk meter at Kaya Mall. So this is specifically what Councillor Mofokeng was referring to. Now we know Kaya Mall is not receiving their electricity for free anymore. But I think we need to request a reason for this deviation, because
For how long? And for how long it was there? Yes.
Mr. Rapela,
Because it might be like that to say anything was done, but only to find that it's not yet even been connected. For it to be there does not mean that there's anything, because there was no report.
Yes.
Yeah, there was no report brought back to us, because he wanted answers from EM. Up till today, he never explained anything to the council.
Thank you, Councillor Mofokeng. I think that will be covered by our questions that we've discussed so far.
Yes.
My question was going to be, in terms of these deviations, isn't it that when the municipality has an approved panel of service providers and an emergency takes place and they take quotes from these service providers, there should be no reason for a deviation, because these I don't want to call it products or services can be given by following the supply chain management process, even if it was an emergency.
deviations are, in terms of the SEM regulations, deviations are allowed, right? As a matter of principle, deviations are allowed provided they meet certain conditions. So there's a tendency by organs of state to always allege that it was impossible to get quotation. People just sit in the office and not get 3 quotations, and then allege that no, it was impossible to get 3 quotations, or they will tell you that those were the exceptional cases, or it was impractical to get quotations. And when you look at it, the risky part of it is that may result into irregular expenditure, because if you are found to have transgressed the SEM regulations, laboring under this condition that it was exceptional case where it was impractical or impossible, and when you try and assess, it was not impossible. I mean, you gave an example. Institutions would appoint a panel of service providers, particularly to deal with that. In any event there's a pipe burst, you have appointed service providers that are sitting in your panel. On a rotation basis, you take one from there, because it was a competitive bidding when you appointed those service providers. So it should not be a problem at all. But they decide not to have a panel of service providers. Now you sit and say, well, it was impractical. It was not impractical. For me, it clearly means you failed to plan. It's not impractical or impossible to get those services. So I had I think in the previous quarter ending September also, if I'm not mistaken, reviewed the deviation and advised management and say the reasons that you are capturing there to say it was impractical and impossible do not hold water. Because if you have panel of service providers, you would have eliminated such. If you have a panel of service providers to install meters, to give an example, why would you have a deviation? Because you have appointed them on your panel. So most of the cases, the reasons that are being given do not necessarily hold water, and the chances of them resulting in irregular expenditure are very imminent. You may be likely to get an auditor who perhaps does not understand the conditions of this regulation, or you may be unlucky and get irregular expenditure. You may survive and think that Auditor General is fine with me, only to find that Auditor General did not zoom in detail into the activities as it were, like this one. But if you are not lucky, chances of you getting irregular expenditure are quite imminent, and we know the consequence of incurring irregular expenditure. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rapela. Okay, I think it's very clear that the reason that why we are looking so much into deviation is for the fear of them eventually turning into irregular expenditure. All right.
So it's for management to tell the committee as to why did they believe it was impossible? Why couldn't they appoint panel of service providers, so that when you have instances like this, you are able to just tap into your panel and appoint one on a rotation basis, so that you don't incur these deviations, which are necessary for me.
I think, all right, so that these 2 deviations are from quarter 1. If you look at quarter 2, thankfully we don't have any deviations. Quarter 2 was ended on December 2021. Looking at the purchases above 100,000, I think we might also find that a number of these purchases are also related to what might have been an emergency, and especially if you look at some of these instances where, for example, this one was a hiring of a honeysucker truck. This is what was concerning me. 480,000 rand, because our own honeysucker is often not functioning. So these kind of things are a concern. Looking at quarter 2, purchases above 100,000, we would find the same tendency. A number of these items are just general service delivery, items that should have been in stock, maintenance of electrical infrastructure, valve, again, hiring a septic truck. So these are things that will continue to appear on these reports. Do we have any comments or inputs related to the purchases above 100,000? We are looking now at both quarter 1 and quarter 2. Perhaps I should ask that those be sent to the office. I know that these are sections of the report that we want to look into in a bit more detail. So let me give you a bit more time, councillors. My apology if I don't see your hand. You just raise it quite high, or otherwise alert me if I'm not noting you. Shall we move, colleagues, to the next section?
There's another one that is talking about the safety tools of about 300,000. I'm also concerned about that. I'm really very, very concerned. Because in most of the time you found that the very same safety tools are there, but they also get lost. How are they handling it and everything? That's my biggest concern. If they are there, those items, because in most possible times you found that the very same safety tools that are being used. Say for example, I'm just making the example of in the Sunny, what is it? The water treatment. We found that most of our tools are being used by those guys, and those tools are staying in their homes, not in our areas. And what if they get lost? There's no guarantee. Our fleets, at night we meet with how many of our fleets here in around Mbalenhle. After hours, our fleets are going up and down, and those fleets are not on duty. So we are at a high risk of losing a lot of the things. We have to come with a policy towards controlling these fleets. Otherwise, we are going to lose a lot of the asset in this municipality. Some are staying with their officials. When you go to the gym after hours, we found their girlfriends, the boyfriends are just doing ups and the downs with our fleet. And the petrol, there's a lot of petrol that is being used in that. We must tighten the belt there.
Thank you, Councillor Mafeking. Okay, arising from that, I find a good question might be whether the municipality has policies to deal with our fleet, and then also the resources and the tools of trade made available to our employees.
Yes.
For example, if you think about these safety tools, if I was a general worker who's having safety tools and I lose them in any general kind of business, you might have to purchase them out of your own salary. So there should be no reason why that's that kind of thing. If that is the reason for purchasing safety tools, there should be no reason for that kind of thing being reflecting on these reports.
Yes.
All right, Councillor Kabine.
Thank you, Chairperson. Mine is only when you get the all wash presentation. Only things that I want to make in agreement, as you said before, to say, let us call all the administration so that we can get the right clarity, all of them, so that you can now, when you come back, you have exactly the good answer. Because now we'll vis-a-vis, we'll divide ourselves, because some others, when you call him so that you can come and explain it, they will come some other some other things that maybe you say they supposed not to do it like this, they're supposed to do it like that. Understand? So when you get the clarity, of all of those things, and then now you've got the answer. So now, so that you can able to know exactly what was happening at the first time. I think that way they will help us a lot. Thank you, Chair.
I agree with you, Councillor Nkabinde. I think that is exactly what we are trying to do now, is to compose the questions that we will be submitting to management for their response when they come to account for it. I think we are totally in line with what you are asking, but of course we need to give them time to respond to this, because they have to submit a number of evidence in relation to our question. Of course, we would like supporting documents for everything that you are asking as well. Councillor Matebula?
I saw also on this report that they have spent it in the University of Johannesburg, but it says on the reason it's invalid. So do we formulate a question? Yeah, it's on page 4. I don't know if it was emergency for the training or what, but the reason it's invalid deviation. Should we formulate a question on that one so that the management can explain as well? Thank you, Chairperson.
I think in general invalid deviation should be explained.
Explain, yes.
Any addition? All right. Thank you very much, colleagues. I think in addition to that, looking at some of these reasons, this is now the irregular expenditure, invalid deviation, no service level agreement, SCM processes were not followed. Some of these expenses you might find that the reason is simply an irregularity in the appointment process. And I'm personally not satisfied with that response. I think we should be requesting more information on the irregular expenditure and the reasons for irregular expenditure for both quarters.
That's true.
Yes, Councillor Mufokeng?
And Chair, if there's nothing, then the consequence management should chip in. We cannot sit around as if we are really not seeing anything that is taking place over here. If we are not explaining at this committee, the consequence management should chip in with immediate effect to deal decisively with all such kind of things.
Yeah.
We don't need
agree
to
with
massage them. We've been massaging them too much.
If we look at the MFMI, colleagues, and also at the terms of reference that we've approved yesterday, specifically relating to unauthorized, irregular, fruitless and wasteful expenditure, we find in our terms of reference we are requesting from the NM reasons for the UIF and W, or otherwise the means that were taken to recover the funds. And it's the same, that's in line with the MFMA. We should be given a response in terms of what measures did she take to recover those funds from whoever it is responsible for authorizing irregular expenditure. So I absolutely agree with you. I think maybe an undesirable tendency of this committee in the past was, let me not say the committee, let me say the council. We might have a recommendation for consequence management to take place, then the council adopts that recommendation, then you never see anything happening, even if you ask about it in MPAC ever again. So I think what we should emphasize on and what we want to know is, where is the money now? How are we going to get it back?
Yeah.
I think that should be our main emphasis. Or otherwise, just, responsible and ethical spending. A lot of these irregular expenses are absolutely unnecessary. If it was included in the budget that we might have a training or some sort of skills development budgeted for, then it would not be an irregular expense to have an an invalid deviation or whatever you want to call it towards the University of Johannesburg. So I think that's like Mr. Rapela was saying, poor planning. Do you have anything to add to these reports, Mr. Rapela?
Yes, Chair. The issue of irregular expenditure, it's a very serious one. Particularly irregular expenditure that is as per transgression of the SCM regulations. We do not know where we are seated as we speak now, whether there was a deliberate act to transgress the SCM regulation, or put it differently, the council approved SCM policy. Isn't that council has approved the SCM policy that we believe it's in line with the SCM regulation. So we don't know whether officials decided. If you look at one of the irregular expenditures, they said bid committee composition not complying with laws and regulations, and you ask yourself why can't a bid committee abide by the SCM regulations? I mean, were they appointed there, were they not trained, but they are expected to implement the council approved SCM policy. So to a certain extent, you may then say it could be negligence, you don't know. But a procedure is that you need to, as members of MPAC, you need to separate, particularly UIFNW, you need to separate investigating UIFNW with your quarterly reports. You need to have separate sessions and say we're going to deal with UIFNW. Your report must be titled UIFNW Investigation Report. Remember the procedure. The procedure is not only to write to management and say, tell us why. But if you look at MFMA, it says once the institution has identified UIFNW, council will then subject that to MPAC, for MPAC to do an investigation. It is you as MPAC which must produce a report and say X and Y must be held responsible. So if you issue a blanket statement and say consequence management must take place, I mean, for who? From who? To who? We don't know. So your line of questioning, as in when you write your question, management must tell you. If you have incurred irregular expenditure, like this one of bid committees, bid committee composition not complying with laws, you ask, management must tell you, administration must tell you, why was bid composition not complying with regulation? Who must be held responsible for this? It must be them who tell you who's responsible for not complying with the bid committees. Once you know, you'll be having a report that says X and Y are responsible for not following SCM. Now, when you make your recommendation, you'll be saying, in terms of our own investigation, evidence is here from management, signed reports from management saying X and Y are the ones who are responsible for deviating from SCM regulation and not complying with bid committee laws and regulations. Then you formulate your report to council and say, from where you are seated, your investigation outcome is that X and Y, because they would have responded in that way. Because your line of questioning must be able to establish facts and who's responsible for transgressing the MFMA regulation.
Can I assist you? Can I assist you? I'm sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Rapela, but we are being disturbed.
So I'm from IT, I was acting here. I'm from IT.
You are from?
IT.
You're from IT?
Yes, she
Okay,
called me.
thank you very much.
Yeah, I had to come and check on my answer.
It's not on, you can just switch it on. Thank you, Mr. Rapela, you can continue.
Okay. Yeah, I was saying you go to be procedural even when you do your reports. The last time AG was saying it must not just be questioning in the form of just writing your question and putting your questions with your monthly monitoring of section 71, section 52. When you have a report from council that says go and investigate UIFNW, you must have a separate report that says it is an investigation report of MPAC on UIFNW. When you write questions to management, like for the example that I gave, where bid committees did not follow the SCM processes as it were, the questioning must also establish who's responsible for not questioning. So those main committee members must account. Why didn't they follow SCM regulations, as it were? So your outcome would then be recommending to council as to whether or not you believe, one, if there's a loss of money, that you must recover this money from these officials. If there was no loss of money, perhaps you want to write off a particular expenditure, you then recommend to council that such expenditure must then be written off. But you must have a separate report that talks to investigation of UIF and WSS MPAC. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rapela. I can see you are very passionate about irregular expenses. All right, so colleagues, Mr. Rapela had actually shared with me some time ago a method that we can follow to investigate fruitless and wasteful and unauthorized expenditure. That's basically outlining what he was just discussing. I think I will share that one with us on the WhatsApp group. But perhaps a good proposal would be to create a subcommittee that will have its sole purpose being the investigation of unauthorized, irregular, fruitless and wasteful expenditure going forward. I think that can assist us. So maybe let's have, let's say, 4 individuals from our committee that will form part of a subcommittee, including myself, that can just investigate fruitless and wasteful, irregular and unauthorized expenditure, and then obviously that committee will report, will discuss the outcome of those investigations in our larger MPAC group. I think you will recall yesterday in our terms of reference we've discussed the issue of creating subcommittees, and I think having a smaller working group might make it a bit easier to scrutinize these documents more effectively. Should I ask for volunteers for this? Let me start there before I appoint anyone. Thank you, Councillor Mufokeng. Do you approve of this subcommittee, colleagues? Let me ask that first. Yes. Okay, so we have a general consensus on that. Can I have another councillor volunteering for this, please? Let me not appoint you. Please volunteer. Thank you. Councillor Van Huisten, do you want to nominate? I'll open it for nominations after the volunteers. Are you volunteering, Councillor Mtengu? Can we have one more person? Are you volunteering, Councillor Matabula? Okay, colleagues, the establishment of the subcommittee is informal at this stage, simply because the council hasn't adopted the terms of reference that we've adopted as a committee yet. So we'll just be meeting at an informal basis when we discuss these matters and then create our investigative report following the council adoption of our terms of reference. Thank you. I think that concludes these reports. The mid-year budget and performance assessment report, we've already said that the same methodology applies. Let me close these reports, if that will suit you, colleagues. Then, looking at our next item on the agenda, we are now at 4.6, Program for Monitoring the Implementation of the FRP. Colleagues, arising from the last council meeting, you might be reminded the financial recovery plan is due to be implemented at the end of April as per a proposal that was given to council actually by Councillor Matabula, who is here. That is the timeline that we've proposed in the council chambers, and you might recall that the executive mayor then indicated she's going to task the MPAC with devising a plan for monitoring the implementation of the finance recovery plan. I think in terms of this, we've discussed this also yesterday, Mr. Rapela, but I didn't make any notes now. But I think in terms of this, let's start with the administration and just request from them specific sections in the financial recovery plan. You might recall from that report. I also have the report here. Let me not speak out of my head now. There are a number of sections that are red here. Not yet started, not yet started, not yet started. If you go to the annexure to the report, you can see, let's include the yellow sections if you will agree with me. The microphone is still not on. Anyway, just for an example, say the first one is the development of a policy framework for enforcement of code of conduct for councillors. Colleagues, we know that the financial recovery plan was adopted by the council in 2019. So personally, it's my view that when you look at policy development, there should be absolutely no reason for a 2 to 3 year delay in developing a document that can be considered by the council. So these are things that we need to question the management on. This one, program has been developed, but it's not possible to implement to date. I think we need to question why. So my general proposal for how to go about monitoring the implementation first is to just pose questions to management in terms of proper reasons why certain sections of the FRP haven't been implemented or started to be implemented yet. Do you agree?
I agree.
So let's have I'm just writing down the names of the proposers and seconders as I've seen you nod. Yes, Councillor Van Huisteen?
I do not think we should ask general questions, we should ask
No.
specific questions. If there's specifics in there, we should go into specifics. Our officials up to now have been very ingenious in their ways of not answering the questions. And one of the problems that we have found, and you'll find that with all our questions that we submit to officials, is the moment you have something a little bit unclear, or there's a loophole somewhere, they will take that loophole. And we need to get to a point where if you ask for let's take that first one that says the policy is not started. We need to know what happened. Why did the policy, why is it not finished? What happened in the meantime? What stumbling blocks were there? And so on. Because all they're going to do is come back and say, all right, it's now due for implementation or for tabling or so on. And we need to know what happened and why did it happen. We cannot just let them go and say, yeah, it's budget constraints is the one. Well, probably not in this case, but they always have budget constraints. So let us get to a point where we can get the proper answers. And if it's a thick document that they have to give it back to us, we have scanners, we're all electronically, so we don't have to print them, so we're not wasting money, and they can all send it all to us so that we can have the proper answers on this. Thank you.
Okay. I think I agree with you. So those kind of questions will apply to most of what we see in this document. We want to know why these actions haven't been implemented, and then with detailed supporting documents. All right, shall we move to our next item?
Yes.
Thank you. 4.7, assessment on payment of a court case between Govan Mbeki and Bex. Bex, if you will recall, is the Bethel and Imsenoni Community for Services. Colleagues, this item is also one that has been delegated to us by the council. So you might recall, just for a short background, the organization, which is called BEX, to my understanding, was established to address the issue of electricity distribution to Betan and Zenoni, since those communities are being load shedded by the municipality. And that organization had then taken the municipality to court. Just a long story short, the court outcome, which is the report that we've seen in our last council meeting, indicated that the municipality is responsible for improved communication between the committee, the community, and the municipality on the matter of electricity supply to those two towns. So there was an argument in council that this kind of a court outcome truly, could have been avoided. If you look at the participatory, let me say, structure of governance, of local governance in South Africa, we are guided by so much legislation on how to communicate with communities, how to communicate with stakeholders, and I think generally it would have been obvious following media reports that this organization is going to take the municipality to court. Perhaps some people should have approached them and just had a genuine discussion. I don't know if that kind of thing took place. That's what we are here to investigate. I think, again, my proposal for this, since this investigation is going to be very specific, into a very specific matter, what we are to assess as the MPAC is, was there negligence on the part of the municipality that led to the outcome of the court ruling? If so, who should be held responsible for that? Specifically looking at from a financial point of view. So we know that this court was discussed in the High Court. Those court cases are extremely expensive, and we need to look into if it is negligence on the part of the municipality or an official in the municipality, who's going to recover those funds that have now been paid out of public money. So my proposal here, colleagues, again, would be to establish a small subcommittee that can look into only the matter of BEX and the payment of the court case relating to possible negligence on the part of the municipality. And that subcommittee is only going to be established for that small issue. Let me not call it a small issue, but for that small period of time in which we are dealing with that issue, after which we will recommend to the committee and then to council. Can I have volunteers for this, or otherwise open the floor for nominations for such a... Do you have something to add, Mr. Rapela?
No,
Oh. I'm just checking because you seem to be frowning, but I think maybe you are just tired.
Chairperson,
Yes.
if I can say, the working committee that is going to deal with this, can we also add that committee into this to go and investigate? I've got a...
Do you want the UIF and
Yes.
W committee to
As
deal with things?
to deal with this as well. Because
Can
we'll
I
end up
have a
having
seconder
enough.
for that proposal? Thank you, Councillor Nabuitenda. All right. I think that concludes our agenda, colleagues. Announcement. There are no announcements today. Maybe just to mention and to welcome the media that is present. The Siskona newspaper had asked us to take a picture of the committee afterwards. Again, if you don't mind, colleagues, let's just meet in the back for them to do that quickly. Is there anything that anybody else wanted to add to this meeting? Yes, Councillor?
Okay, except from this meeting, thanks very much for your meeting, thanks for your time. I just want to find out what time are we needed at MLO Thursday and Friday?
I wish I could give you an answer. I have not yet received one. This morning I'd only received confirmation from the Speaker's office on the matter of travelling that we've already discussed in the WhatsApp group. I've requested from them to send us the program, or at least the time that our councillors are expected to be there at the soonest possibility. Councillor Nel Buitendag is indicating it should be 9 o'clock. Thank you for that. Let me also ask, while we are talking about the training, on Thursday I will not be attending due to a family matter. So I'd like to ask if one of our councillors can please just take a device that you can request from the officials from SAGA to download the documents that they will be presenting on Thursday and Friday. Thank you, Councillor Nel Buitendag. So that we can have that for our committee going forward. At least if we need a refresher or something, we'll have those documents to our disposal. Thank you very much, colleagues.